The story begins in the year 2007, in the warm, coastal region of the Algarve, Portugal. It was a time that should have been defined by family memories, sunshine, and relaxation. However, history remembers the date of May 3rd, 2007. Not for a holiday, but for an event that would spark one of the most extensive and expensive investigations in modern history. We are looking at the disappearance of a young British subject, a daughter who vanished into the night, leaving behind only questions and an open window. To understand the gravity of this case, we must first examine the setting. The family was staying at the Ocean Club in the village of Praia da Luz. This location is significant because it was perceived as a safe haven, a quiet resort town favored by tourists seeking tranquility. The apartment, located on the ground floor, seemed secure. It was situated near the edge of the complex, adjacent to a public road. This detail is crucial for our analysis because, in hindsight, what offered convenience for the family also offered accessibility for an outsider. On that fateful evening, the routine was established. The parents, Kate and Jerry, along with their group of friends, were dining at a tapas restaurant located roughly 50 meters away from the sleeping quarters. The distance is often a point of debate. 50 meters is not far. It is within walking distance, within shouting distance. The group had arranged a system to check on their sleeping family members at intervals, approximately every 30 minutes. This system relied on trust in the safety of the resort, and trust that nothing could happen in such a short window of time. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the mother returned to the apartment for her turn to check. What she found, or rather, what she did not find, changed everything. The door to the sleeping quarters was open. The window, which should have been closed, was open. The external shutter was raised, and the bed where the young family member should have been sleeping was empty. From an investigative perspective, the open window is the most chilling piece of physical evidence. It suggests a specific intent. It implies that someone knew the layout, or perhaps someone had been watching. The draft blowing through that room carried with it the realization that the sanctity of the family unit had been breached. This was not a case of an individual wandering off. The physical state of the room, with the window manipulated, pointed immediately toward an external actor. Your support shines a light into the shadows of this investigation, giving a voice to those who have been silenced for too long. Please hit the like button and subscribe to ensure we can keep exposing the truths that others try to hide. Stay with us, because the evidence found in the suspect's secret lair is something you have to see to believe. We must pause here to analyze the psychological impact of this scene. For the family, the transition from a relaxed dinner to a state of absolute panic occurred in a single heartbeat. The phrase often used in reports is that the mother ran back to the table shouting, "They have taken her." This initial reaction is significant because it establishes that, from the very first second, the family believed this was a crime committed by a stranger. They did not assume she was hiding. They instinctively felt the presence of an intruder. Critically, we must consider the vulnerability of the location. Ground floor apartments are statistically more accessible to intruders. The location of this specific apartment, with points of entry obscured from the direct view of the restaurant, created a blind spot. In the world of security and criminology, a blind spot is an opportunity. Whoever entered that room that night likely utilized the cover of darkness and the rhythm of the parents' dining schedule to execute their plan. The disappearance of this young individual is a tragedy that highlights the fragility of safety. One moment, a family is complete. The next, a member is gone. The silence of that apartment in Praia da Luz continues to echo years later. It was a secure location, yet it became the scene of a profound mystery. As we move forward in this analysis, keep in mind that the timeline is tight. The window of opportunity for the perpetrator was incredibly narrow. This suggests either remarkable luck or precise planning. As we will see, evidence discovered years later would suggest the latter. In any investigation regarding a missing person, professionals refer to the golden hour. This term describes the immediate period following the report of an incident, a critical window of time where evidence is fresh, memories are sharp, and the chances of recovery are highest. In the case of the disappearance in Praia da Luz, the golden hour was unfortunately consumed by chaos, confusion, and a clash of cultures. When the alarm was raised shortly after 10 in the evening, the reaction was frantic. The resort staff and the group of friends began a desperate search of the complex. They called out the name of the missing individual, their voices ringing through the quiet streets of the village. While this reaction is entirely human and understandable, from a forensic standpoint, it was catastrophic. Dozens of people entered and exited the apartment in the initial confusion. They touched surfaces, opened doors, and walked across the floor. In doing so, they inadvertently contaminated the crime scene. Any potential fingerprints, footprints, or microscopic fibers left by the intruder were at risk of being destroyed by the very people trying to help. The preservation of the scene, a fundamental rule of police work, was lost in the panic. The local Portuguese police, the GNR, arrived later. By the time they secured the perimeter, the timeline had already been compromised. There were immediate language barriers and procedural differences between the British family and the Portuguese authorities. This friction would go on to define the early years of the investigation. The local police initially treated the event as a case of a wandering person rather than a criminal act. This assumption delayed the sealing of borders and the implementation of roadblocks, giving the person responsible a significant head start. Within 24 hours, the dynamic of the case shifted from a local search to a global phenomenon. The British media descended upon Praia da Luz with an intensity rarely seen. Satellite trucks lined the streets, and reporters broadcasted live from the resort. The face of the missing daughter, a blonde young individual with a distinctive mark in her eye, was plastered on the front page of every major newspaper. This media storm had a dual effect. On one hand, it generated unprecedented awareness. People all over the world were looking for her. On the other hand, the pressure on the investigators was immense. Every move the police made was scrutinized, criticized, and analyzed by the press. This scrutiny created an environment of tension. The Portuguese authorities felt attacked by the British press, and the family felt unsupported by the local system. We must also look at the early sightings and theories. In the days following the incident, descriptions of suspicious individuals began to emerge. One of the friends dining with the parents reported seeing a man carrying a young subject away from the apartment complex earlier that night. This sighting became a cornerstone of the investigation for years. It painted a picture of a stranger disappearing into the darkness, holding the sleeping subject. However, years later, this lead would be re-evaluated, showing how fragile eyewitness testimony can be in the midst of a high-stress event. The media narrative also turned dark. As the weeks turned into months without a breakthrough, the sympathy of the public began to fracture. Questions were asked about the parents' decision to leave the family members unattended. The investigation took a turn that shocked the world when the parents themselves were named as formal suspects, or arguidos, by the Portuguese police. It was a theory that suggested the family was involved in a cover-up of an accident. This theory has since been largely discredited, and the status was lifted. But for a long time, it diverted resources and attention away from the search for an external perpetrator. The focus shifted from who took her to who is to blame. Meanwhile, the trail was going cold. The real perpetrator, a person who we now know was likely watching from the shadows, remained unnoticed. The noise of the media circus drowned out the silent clues that were left behind. As we analyze this period, it becomes clear that the initial response was flawed. The lack of immediate border control and the contamination of the scene were critical errors. The tragedy of the disappearance was compounded by the tragedy of the investigation. The individual responsible for this act walked away into the night, while the world argued over timelines and tapas. It would take over a decade for new evidence to point the compass in a different, more sinister direction towards a man living in a camper van just miles away. For years, the investigation into the disappearance in Praia da Luz felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. The police had a timeline, a location, and a victim. But they lacked a central figure, a suspect who could tie everything together. That changed when the focus of the inquiry shifted toward a German national known to the public only as Christian B. This individual was not merely a tourist passing through. He was a phantom of the Algarve, a man who lived on the fringes of society, invisible yet omnipresent. To understand why Christian B became the prime suspect, we must examine his lifestyle during the mid-2010s. He did not live in a traditional home. Instead, he resided in a distinctive camper van, a Volkswagen model with a cream and yellow exterior. This vehicle is crucial to the investigation. A camper van is not just a mode of transport. It is a mobile base of operations. It allowed the suspect to move between the surfing beaches of the coast and the remote hills of the interior without leaving a paper trail. Investigators argue that this transience made him the perfect offender, someone who could be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The breakthrough that placed Christian B at the center of this case was not a witness testimony, but a digital handshake. Modern criminology often relies on metadata, and in this case, cell phone records provided the smoking gun. German investigators discovered that a mobile phone belonging to Christian B was active in Praia da Luz on the night of the disappearance. The data is precise. At roughly 7:30 in the evening on May 3, 2007, his phone connected to a cell tower that serviced the area surrounding the Ocean Club apartments. This places him geographically within minutes of the family's location. Just as the parents were sitting down to dinner, the call lasted for approximately 30 minutes. Who was he speaking to? And more importantly, why was he there? Critics of the investigation point out that being in the area is not proof of a crime. However, forensic analysts argue that context is everything. Christian B had no legitimate business in that specific residential zone at that hour. He was not a guest at the resort. The presence of his device in that specific grid, during the exact window of opportunity when the taking occurred, creates a circumstantial link that is difficult to dismiss. For years, people looked for a random drifter. But Christian B was a local in all but name. He knew the roads, he knew the language, and he knew the layout of the resorts. His camper van gave him the ability to observe without drawing attention. He was a fixture in the landscape, a man who blended into the background of the hippie and surfer communities while hiding a much darker reality beneath the surface. The discovery of the cell phone data was a turning point. It transformed Christian B from a person of interest into the primary focus of a murder investigation. It suggests that, while the world was looking for a sophisticated international network, the answer might have been sitting in a battered van, parked just down the road, operated by a man who made a living out of not being seen. When profiling a suspect, criminologists look for patterns. They look for a modus operandi, a method of operation that repeats itself over time. In the case of Christian B, his history reveals a disturbing consistency. He was not a novice criminal. By the time he was living in the Algarve in the year 2007, he had already established a career based on theft, intrusion, and the exploitation of secure locations. Court records and police files describe Christian B as a prolific burglar. His target of choice was holiday accommodation. This is a significant detail. Holiday resorts are unique environments. They are places where people feel safe, often leaving doors unlocked or windows open to let in the evening breeze. Christian B understood this psychology. He knew that tourists were relaxed and often careless with security. His method was disciplined and forensic. Witnesses and police reports suggest he often operated at night, dressed in dark clothing to evade detection. He was known to use tools to manipulate locks and shutters. This expertise is critical when we look back at the apartment in Praia da Luz. The open window and the raised shutter were initially baffling to the family. However, placed against the profile of Christian B., they look less like a mystery and more like the signature of a professional intruder. But his motive was not always financial. While he did steal cash and electronics, investigators noted a darker trend. He also targeted travel documents, passports, and identification cards. In the criminal underworld, these items are valuable commodities, but they also suggest a desire to control identities. Furthermore, his criminal history included severe offenses against individuals, not just property. He has been described by prosecutors as a dangerous offender, a term that implies he hunted for opportunities. Those who knew him during his time in Portugal describe a man with two faces. By day, he could be charming, intelligent, and social. He worked odd jobs and mingled with the expatriate community. But at night, often under the influence of alcohol or other substances, his personality would shift. Associates reported aggressive outbursts and unsettling remarks. This Jekyll and Hyde dynamic is common in offenders who manage to evade capture for long periods. They are experts at camouflage. One of the most chilling aspects of his pattern was his familiarity with the interior of the homes he targeted. He did not just break in. He often scouted the locations beforehand. He knew who was inside. This aligns with the theory that the disappearance of the young individual was not a random snatch and grab, but a calculated act by someone who had been watching the apartment, noting the routine of the parents, and waiting for the precise moment when the surveillance was down. Christian B. was a man who specialized in entering spaces where he did not belong. He was a man who felt entitled to take what was not his, whether that was property or, as the prosecution alleges, a human life. The leap from burglary to the taking of a person is significant, but in the twisted logic of a career criminal, it is a line that can be crossed when the opportunity presents itself. The narrative now shifts to the year 2016, nearly a decade after the disappearance. The location is Braunschweig, Germany. The setting is an abandoned industrial site, often referred to as the box factory or the dead factory. This dilapidated property, surrounded by overgrown vegetation and fences, would yield the most significant physical evidence in the entire case. At this time, Christian B. was not yet publicly named as the suspect in the Madeleine case, but he was on the radar of the German police for other matters. A raid was authorized on this property. The atmosphere of the place was described by investigators and journalists as cold and foreboding. It was a place of isolation, perfect for hiding secrets. During the search, a pivotal discovery was made, almost by accident. A dog belonging to a neighbor, or the police team, became agitated near a specific patch of ground. This led officers to investigate what lay beneath the soil. Buried deep underground, they found a plastic bag. Inside this bag was not just refuse, but a digital archive that would shock the seasoned detectives. The bag contained multiple USB sticks and hard drives. In the world of modern forensics, this is known as a data dump. When analysts cracked the encryption and accessed the files, they found thousands of images and videos. These materials were not harmless family photos. They were documentation of severe illegal acts. They depicted crimes against vulnerable subjects and vulnerable individuals. The significance of this find cannot be overstated. It proved that Christian B. was not just a burglar. He was an individual with a deep-seated interest in the exploitation of children. The content of these drives provided the psychological profile that prosecutors needed. It showed that he had the propensity, the inclination, to commit the type of crime that occurred in Praia da Luz. Furthermore, the factory search revealed other disturbing items. Reports suggest the discovery of clothing and swimwear belonging to young individuals, items that Christian B., a single man with no family of his own, had no reason to possess. This collection of trophies suggests a compulsive behavior. Offenders of this nature often keep items to relive their crimes, a behavior known as keeping souvenirs. The discovery at the factory in 2016 acted as a catalyst. It gave German authorities the leverage to hold Christian B. in custody for other offenses. While they built the case regarding the missing British girl, it was the moment the investigation transitioned from a missing person search to a homicide inquiry. The prosecution's theory solidified. The man who lived in the camper van, who stole from tourists, was also a man who hoarded digital and physical evidence of his dark desires in a hole in the ground. If not for that raid, and if not for the discovery of that buried bag, Christian B. might have remained a ghost. Instead, the secret evidence opened a window into his mind, revealing a level of depravity that aligned perfectly with the profile of the person who took the young daughter from her bed in 2007. The factory was not just a hiding place. It was a vault of incriminating truths. The investigation into the suspect, Christian B., took a decisive turn, not on the dusty roads of the Algarve, but within the sterile environment of a digital forensics laboratory. Following the seizure of the storage devices from the abandoned factory in 2016, analysts were tasked with decoding the mind of the man who lived in the camper van. What they discovered was a collection of data that prosecutors argue serves as a blueprint for his crimes. This was not merely a stash of illicit images. It was a library of dark fantasies, captured in chat logs, and, most disturbingly, in the suspect's own handwriting. To understand the significance of this evidence, we must look at the volume of the data. The hard drives contained terabytes of information. Among the thousands of files, investigators found logs of conversations conducted on platforms like Skype. In these digital exchanges, Christian B. allegedly communicated with other individuals who shared his specific and illegal interests. These were not casual conversations. According to police reports, the suspect openly discussed his desire to capture a young individual. He spoke of the logistics of the taking, discussing how to transport a small subject without detection and how to secure them in a location he controlled. These chat logs are critical because they establish premeditation. They show that the concept of the taking was not a spur-of-the-moment impulse, but a long-standing fixation. He was actively seeking validation from others, refining his methods, and normalizing his deviant thoughts through text. However, the most chilling discovery was not what he typed to others, but what he wrote for himself. Buried within the evidence were digital manuscripts, short stories, and journal entries written by Christian B. At first glance, these could be dismissed as fiction. However, as investigators read through the pages, the parallels to the reality of the Praia da Luz case became impossible to ignore. These writings, which we will refer to as the manuscripts, describe specific scenarios of the incident with a level of detail that suggests they may be grounded in memory rather than imagination. In one specific narrative, the author describes a scene at a parking location. He writes about waiting in the shadows for a target. The story details the arrival of a mother holding the hand of her young daughter. The author describes the method of attack, the use of a chemical agent, likely a sedative or chloroform applied to a cloth, to incapacitate the adult guardian. The narrative continues with the author describing the act of lifting the shaking bundle the child into his vehicle. The forensic relevance here is the methodology. The use of sedatives has long been a theory in the disappearance of the daughter in Portugal. The lack of noise, the fact that the other individuals in the room did not wake up, and the swiftness of the operation all point to a perpetrator who knew how to silence a scene. Christian B.'s writing confirms that he fantasized about, and understood, the mechanics of using chemicals to facilitate a removal. Even more disturbing is a second narrative found in the archives. In this story, the author describes a domestic setting where a young individual is brought to him. He describes the physical attributes of the subject: a small frame and, crucially, long light-colored hair tied in a ponytail. He writes about the child approaching him and the feeling of euphoria this contact gives him. The most significant linguistic marker in these writings is the use of the word paradise. In his story, after securing the child, the narrator thinks to himself, "Welcome to paradise." This connects directly to the real world. We know from witnesses and police investigations that Christian B. referred to his hideout at the Arade Dam, a remote reservoir in the Portuguese wilderness, as his little paradise. The repetition of this specific noun links his fictional safe house with his actual physical location in the Algarve. Psychological profilers and criminologists have analyzed these texts. Their assessment is that these are not standard works of creative fiction. They argue that offenders of this type often use writing to relive their crimes or to rehearse for future ones. The blurring of lines between what happened and what was written is a common trait in the psychology of high-profile offenders. The detailed description of the subject's fear, the silence of the operation, and the subsequent transport to a secure location mirrors the timeline of the night in May 2007. Critics of the prosecution might argue that writing a story is not a confession. It is not physical DNA. However, in a circumstantial case, these writings provide a window into the suspect's intent. They prove that the scenario of snatching a young family member from a parent was a scenario he played out in his mind repeatedly. The discovery of the manuscripts changed the complexion of the case. It suggested that the answers to the mystery were not lost in the ocean, but had been saved on a hard drive, written by the very man who drove his camper van through the streets of Praia da Luz. As the prosecutors prepare their case for the deadline in late 2025, these stories will likely form the backbone of the argument that for Christian B., the line between a dark story and a tragic reality simply did not exist. The timeline of the investigation moves forward to the year 2008. It had been exactly 1 year since the disappearance of the young British daughter from Praia da Luz. While the official police inquiry was stalling, hitting dead ends and chasing false leads across Europe, a critical interaction was taking place just across the border in Spain. This event, which went unreported for over a decade, is now considered by German prosecutors to be one of the closest moments. The suspect, Christian B., came to a confession. We must introduce a key witness known to the public as Helge B. This individual was not a detective or a journalist. He was a former associate of the suspect. They moved in the same circles, a transient community of drifters and seasonal workers who lived in camper vans and navigated the darker undercurrents of the Algarve. Helge knew Christian B. well. He knew his habits, his temper, and his criminal history involving theft and burglary. However, he did not suspect the true depth of his associate's depravity until a chance meeting at a music festival. The event was the Festival of the Dragon in Orgiva, Spain. It was a gathering point for travelers and those living off the grid. According to witness statements provided to the German police, Helge and Christian B. sat down to drink and talk. The conversation, as it often did in those days, turned to the most famous missing person case in the world. The face of the missing individual was everywhere, and the mystery of how a young individual could vanish from a secure apartment without a sound was a topic of global speculation. It was during this discussion that the dynamic shifted. Helge, perhaps speaking rhetorically, remarked on the strangeness of the case. He commented on how baffling it was that the subject had been taken so quietly, without alerting the parents or the siblings sleeping in the same room. He questioned how it was possible for the perpetrator to leave no trace of noise. According to the sworn testimony of Helge B., Christian B. responded with a sentence that froze the conversation. The suspect allegedly said, "No, she did not scream." We must pause to analyze this statement. It is brief, consisting of only 5 words, yet it carries massive forensic weight. If Christian B. was merely a spectator discussing the news, he would have speculated. He might have said, maybe she was asleep, or perhaps she was silenced. But he did not speculate. He made a definitive statement of fact. She did not scream. This creates a logical paradox. The only person who could possibly know whether the subject screamed or remained silent is the person who was in the room at the moment of the taking. By asserting this detail as a fact, Christian B. inadvertently placed himself at the scene of the crime. The reaction that followed is equally telling. Helge B. reports that immediately after making this comment, Christian B. realized his error. The confidence drained from him. He became visibly uncomfortable, realizing he had let his guard down. Shortly after this exchange, the suspect abruptly left the festival. This behavior is consistent with what psychologists call leakage, when a deceptive individual accidentally reveals the truth during a moment of relaxation or arrogance, only to panic when they realize the implication. For years, skeptics argued that this was merely hearsay. A conversation between two acquaintances at a festival is difficult to prove in a court of law. How could investigators verify that Christian B. was even in Spain in the year 2008? Among the documents found in the buried stash in Germany was an insurance claim. This document, signed by Christian B. himself, detailed a traffic accident involving his camper van. The location of the accident was Orgiva, Spain. The date on the document aligned perfectly with the dates of the music festival. This piece of paper provided the digital footprint needed to corroborate Helge's story. It proved, beyond doubt, that the suspect was at that specific location at that specific time. The credibility of the witness, Helge B., is a major factor in the prosecution's strategy. It is important to note that Helge is not an anonymous tipster seeking fame. He is the same witness whose testimony helped convict Christian B. in the year 2019 for the severe offense against the 72-year-old American woman in Portugal. The court found Helge to be a reliable witness in that trial. Therefore, his account of the festival confession carries significant legal weight. Critics of the case often ask why Helge waited so long to speak. The answer lies in the nature of their relationship and the fear Christian B. inspired in those around him. The suspect was known for his unpredictable aggression. It was only years later, when Helge saw the suspect's face connected to the case on television, that he contacted authorities, finally understanding the true meaning of the words spoken that night in Spain. It suggests that while the suspect has maintained a wall of silence during police interrogations, there was a moment where his ego overrode his caution. The statement "she did not scream" implies control. It implies that the taking was swift and that the perpetrator had immediate dominance over the situation. As we move forward to examine the physical tools used in this crime, specifically the vehicles, we must keep this conversation in mind. It serves as the psychological anchor of the case. It is the moment where the suspect, believing he was safe among friends, may have whispered the truth that the world had been waiting to hear. It turns the investigation from a search for a phantom into a pursuit of a man who knew exactly why the night was silent. In any high-profile investigation involving the disappearance of a person, vehicles often serve as silent witnesses. They are the tools that facilitate movement, concealment, and escape. In the inquiry into the disappearance of the British daughter from Praia da Luz, two specific vehicles have emerged as critical pieces of physical evidence. These machines, a vintage camper van and a luxury sedan, provide a disturbing insight into the duality of the suspect, Christian B. They represent the two sides of his life in the Algarve, the transient drifter and the calculating criminal. The first vehicle of interest is a distinctive Volkswagen T3 Westphalia camper van. This van, with its two-tone cream and yellow exterior, was not merely a mode of transport for the suspect. It was his primary residence. Christian B. lived a nomadic lifestyle, parking this van on beaches, cliff tops, and remote scrubland surrounding Praia da Luz. From an investigative perspective, this vehicle is significant because it offered him the ultimate camouflage. In the mid-2010s, the Algarve was a magnet for surfers and travelers living in vans. By adopting this lifestyle, Christian B. became part of the scenery visible to everyone, yet noticed by no one. However, the van offered more than just camouflage. It offered utility. Criminologists analyzing the case argue that a camper van provides a perpetrator with a mobile, secure location. Unlike a suspect who must drag a victim to a secondary location or a house, An individual with a van has immediate control over the environment. The van had curtains, a bed, and the ability to move instantly. Police records confirm that this specific van was frequently seen parked in the vicinity of the Ocean Club resort in the days leading up to the incident. Its presence suggests that the suspect was not just passing through. He was observing the area, studying the routines of the tourists, and waiting for an opportunity. The second vehicle provides a stark contrast to the hippie aesthetic of the camper van and raises one of the biggest red flags in the entire investigation. It was a Jaguar XJR6, a powerful German luxury saloon car. The fact that a man living in a rundown van also possessed a high-performance vehicle with German registration plates speaks to his involvement in profitable criminal activities, likely burglary and drug offenses. But it is not the car itself that interests detectives. It is the paperwork associated with it. The timeline regarding this Jaguar is forensic dynamite. According to vehicle registration records uncovered by German investigators, Christian B. was in possession of this car on the night of the disappearance in May 2007. However, exactly one day after the young daughter vanished on May 4, 2007, the ownership of this vehicle was abruptly transferred. Christian B. re-registered the car to an acquaintance back in Germany. We must pause to evaluate the logic behind this action. Why would a person urgently transfer the legal ownership of a vehicle less than 24 hours after a major police mobilization in their immediate area? Investigative profilers suggest this is a classic distancing tactic. If the suspect feared that witnesses might have seen the car near the apartment, or if he feared the vehicle contained physical traces of the missing individual, his priority would be to disassociate himself from that license plate as quickly as possible. The timing is too precise to be a coincidence. It suggests a reaction to an event, a need to clean the slate. The Jaguar eventually became a key component of the case years later. In 2016, during the raid on the abandoned factory in Braunschweig, the secret evidence, police found this very same Jaguar parked inside the hangar. It had not been sold or scrapped. It had been kept. Its discovery allowed forensic teams to finally access the interior. The forensic examination of both vehicles has been exhaustive. The BKA, the German Federal Criminal Police Office, seized the camper van and the Jaguar to conduct advanced biological testing. They were looking for DNA, hair strands, or fibers that could link the missing subject to the suspect's property. While the official results of these tests have never been fully publicized to protect the ongoing integrity of the trial, the fact that the prosecution is proceeding suggests they believe the circumstantial weight of these vehicles is strong. There is also a psychological element to these machines. The camper van represents the suspect's ability to live on the margins, to be a ghost in the system. The Jaguar represents his arrogance and his need for status. The rapid transfer of the Jaguar suggests a moment of panic or cold calculation in the hours following the disappearance. Furthermore, we must recall the testimony of Hel J.B. regarding the festival confession in Spain. It was the camper van that Christian B. used to travel to that festival in the year 2008. This connects the vehicle directly to the timeline of his alleged admission. The van was not just a home. It was the vessel that carried him away from the scene of the crime and across international borders. As we view the case today, these two vehicles remain central to the narrative. They answer the question of how. How could a suspect monitor a target without suspicion? The van. How could a suspect flee or transport a subject? The van. And how does a suspect show consciousness of guilt? By trying to erase their link to a recognizable car like the Jaguar the very next day, in the silent language of evidence, the paperwork of that Jaguar screams just as loudly as any witness. As the investigation into the disappearance of the British daughter moved into the 2020s, the focus shifted away from the coastal resorts and moved inland. The inquiry led detectives to a location that stands in stark contrast to the holiday apartments of Praia da Luz. This location is the Arade Dam, a vast, man-made reservoir located roughly 30 miles from the coast. To the casual observer, It is a scenic spot, a place of quiet water and dry hills. But to the investigators tracking the suspect, Christian B., this area represents something far more sinister. It is believed to be his sanctuary. The significance of the Array Dam was not immediately apparent in the early years of the case. It was only after the breakthrough involving the secret evidence in 2016, specifically the hard drives and the GPS data found in the abandoned factory, that this location was flagged. The digital footprint of the suspect revealed that he did not just visit this reservoir. He inhabited it. Witnesses and police records confirm that Christian B. frequently parked his camper van on a specific peninsula, jutting out into the water. It was a remote location, accessible only by dirt tracks, far from the prying eyes of tourists or police patrols. For a man living a double life, one as a drifter and one as a perpetrator of severe offenses, this isolation was essential. However, it is the way Christian B. described this place that chills the blood of the investigators. He reportedly referred to this desolate spot as his little paradise. In those disturbing stories written by the suspect, he described the taking of a young individual after securing the victim. The narrator of the story writes a specific phrase, "Welcome to paradise." Forensic linguists and psychologists argue that this is not a coincidence. In the mind of a criminal, the line between fantasy and reality is often porous. By using the word paradise to describe his fictional lair and using the same word to describe his real-world hideout at the Array Dam, Christian B. arguably created a linguistic bridge between his crimes and his geography. This connection suggests that the Array Dam was not just a campsite. It was a theater where he felt safe to act out his darkest impulses, or perhaps to hide the evidence of them. The connection was strong enough to trigger one of the largest search operations in recent Portuguese history. In May of the year 2023, and continuing into later phases of the inquiry, authorities descended on the reservoir. This was not a routine sweep. It was a forensic excavation. Police from Portugal, Germany, and the United Kingdom collaborated on the ground. They used heavy machinery to clear the scrubland. They used sniffer dogs trained to detect biological remains. They even drained specific sections of the water to expose the mud beneath. What were they looking for? The official statements were guarded, mentioning only material evidence. However, sources close to the investigation suggested the search was highly specific. They were looking for fragments of clothing, specifically the nightwear the missing daughter was wearing. They were looking for a recording device or a camera, items the suspect was known to use to document his offenses. And, inevitably, they were looking for biological traces that might have survived the passage of time. The search focused on the exact area where Christian B. used to park his camper van. Photographs recovered from his hard drives showed him at this location, often in states of undress or engaging in unsettling behavior. These images proved he felt completely secure there. He felt he owned that space. From a criminological perspective, the Array Dam fits the profile of a disposal site or a shrine. Offenders who commit high-stakes crimes often return to the scene or to a location associated with the crime to relive the feeling of control. The fact that Christian B. continued to visit the reservoir years after the disappearance in 2007 supports the theory that the location held a deep, secret significance for him. During the search operations, several items were recovered. Bags of soil and fabric were taken away for analysis in German laboratories. While the public expected an immediate announcement, forensic science is a slow process. The absence of a breaking news discovery does not mean the search was a failure. In a cold case, even a microscopic fiber or a chemical residue found deep in the soil can be the final piece of the puzzle. The operation at the Array Dam also served a psychological purpose. It sent a message to the suspect, who was sitting in a prison cell in Germany. It told him that the police knew about his paradise. They knew where he slept, where he hid, and where he felt safe. By turning over every stone in that reservoir, investigators were dismantling the safe haven he had built in his mind. The Algarve interior is wild and empty. Hiding a small individual or a piece of evidence in such a landscape is disturbingly easy. Yet, the persistence of the police proves that the file is not closed. The Arrayed Dam remains a silent witness. Its waters hold the memory of the suspect's presence, and perhaps the answer to the question that the world has been asking for nearly 2 decades. The link between the word paradise in his diary and the mud of the reservoir is the strongest circumstantial thread tying the fantasy of the writer to the reality of the suspect. The narrative of the investigation into the disappearance of the British daughter took a dramatic and unforeseen turn in the summer of the year 2025. After years of quiet bureaucratic maneuvering and legal battles in German courts, the physical search for evidence suddenly reactivated on the ground in Portugal. To understand the context of this operation, we must look at the timeline. On the 3rd of June, 2025, the Portuguese police, acting in close coordination with the German Federal Criminal Police Office, the BKA, initiated a massive search protocol. This was not a routine check. It was a major operation, driven by a specific European investigation order issued by the German prosecution. While the British authorities were informed of the developments, they did not maintain an active presence on the ground, leaving the execution of the search to their continental counterparts. The target of this renewed interest was a location called Atalaya, situated on the outskirts of the town of Lagos. Geographically, this site is significant. It lies roughly 1.5 kilometers from the resort of Praia da Luz, where the disappearance occurred in 2007. However, its relevance to the suspect, Christian B., is even more direct. This area, often described as a scrubland, is located dangerously close to a property where the suspect resided during his time in Portugal. Local sources and investigative reports have dubbed this specific trail Brückner's Rat Path, suggesting it was a route he frequented or a location he used to move undetected between the coast and the interior. The methodology of the search in 2025 was exhaustive and relied heavily on modern technology. Over the course of 3 intense days, investigators cleared large sections of the overgrown terrain. They utilized heavy excavators to strip away the top layers of soil and employed ground-penetrating radar systems to scan for anomalies beneath the surface. This technology is designed to identify disturbances in the earth, such as concealed voids or buried objects, which are invisible to the naked eye. The operation also extended to the examination of water sources. Fire crews were brought in to drain and pump out several wells and cisterns in the vicinity to ensure no potential evidence had been submerged. Analysts observing the case have asked, why now? Why launch such a resource-intensive operation nearly 2 decades after the fact? The answer lies in the legal pressure facing the German prosecution. Christian B., who is currently incarcerated for a separate severe offense, is scheduled for potential release in September 2025. This approaching deadline created a race against time for the investigators. Without a new indictment or fresh evidence to secure a continued detention, there is a genuine risk that the primary suspect could walk free, potentially fleeing the jurisdiction or destroying any remaining trails. The search in Atalaya was likely a strategic attempt to find the missing link that could justify keeping the suspect behind bars. During the operation, the atmosphere was tense. Media outlets from around the world watched as officers sifted through the dirt. There were moments of high alert. Reports emerged that bone fragments had been discovered at the site, sparking a brief wave of speculation that the final resting place of the missing individual had been found. However, forensic analysis quickly tempered these expectations. The recovered fragments were determined to be of non-human origin, belonging instead to animals. This distinction is crucial in forensic reporting. While the find was not relevant to the human case, it demonstrated the thoroughness of the search teams, who were flagging every biological anomaly. Despite the lack of a publicized smoking gun, the operation was not without yield. Bags of material were seen being removed from the site. destined for advanced laboratories in Germany for DNA analysis and chemical testing. These samples likely include soil, fabric, or other debris that could hold microscopic evidence linking the suspect to the location. The search, which was permitted to last until Friday, the 6th of June, was concluded a day early, on Thursday, the 5th of June. The police announced the completion of their objectives without a press conference, leaving the exact nature of their findings shrouded in silence. The operation in 2025 highlights the dedication of the authorities to exhaust every lead, no matter how much time has passed. It also underscores the fragility of the legal situation. With the suspect's release date looming, the results of the forensic tests on the soil from Italia could determine the future of the entire investigation. The search may have ended quietly, but the analysis of what was found in the rat path continues, holding the potential to either close the case or leave it as an eternal mystery. The renewed investigation in the Algarve during the year 2025 was not merely a physical search, it was a demonstration of modern forensic capability. While the early years of the case were defined by eyewitness testimonies and sketches, the operation at the Atalaya site and the Arade Dam showcased a shift in strategy, moving away from relying on human memory to relying on the undeniable truths hidden within the earth itself. To understand the scope of this operation, we must first look at the primary tool utilized by the German and Portuguese teams: ground-penetrating radar, often referred to in law enforcement circles as GPR. This technology is critical because it allows investigators to see beneath the surface without disturbing the ground. It works by sending high-frequency radio pulses into the soil. When these pulses encounter a change in density, such as a buried object, a void, or soil that has been previously dug up and replaced, the signal bounces back, creating a data map of the underground terrain. In the context of the search for the missing daughter, GPR was used to identify anomalies. Investigators were not necessarily looking for a specific shape, they were looking for disturbances. If the suspect, Christian B., had dug a hole in the mid-2010s to hide evidence, the density of that refilled soil would differ from the surrounding undisturbed earth. The radar can detect this difference even decades later. This non-invasive method allowed the police to scan vast areas of the scrubland quickly, pinpointing specific zones that required physical excavation. Once the radar identified these points of interest, the heavy machinery moved in. Observers noted the presence of large excavators and forestry clearing equipment. This phase of the operation was brutal and direct. The dense vegetation, which had grown wild for years, had to be stripped away to allow the forensic teams access to the soil. However, the use of heavy machinery was calculated. The excavators removed only the top layers of the earth. Once the deeper layers were exposed, the process slowed down. Teams equipped with trowels, rakes, and sieves took over, sifting through the dirt by hand. This transition from heavy industry to delicate archaeology highlights the dual nature of the search. Massive in scale, yet microscopic in detail. A significant portion of the technological effort was directed toward water sources. The area surrounding the suspect's former haunts contains several disused wells and underground cisterns. In criminal investigations, bodies of water are often used by offenders to dispose of incriminating items, such as weapons, clothing, or electronic devices. To address this, authorities deployed high-capacity drainage pumps. Fire crews worked to lower the water levels in these reservoirs, allowing forensic experts to descend into the darkness. The sludge at the bottom of these wells was collected and bagged, treated not as waste, but as potential evidence that could contain the chemical signature of the missing individual or the suspect. During the course of the search, there was a moment of intense speculation regarding skeletal remains. Reports circulated that bones had been discovered at the site. From a news reporting perspective, it is vital to clarify this incident. The finding of bones in a rural, wild environment is statistically common. The Algarve is home to various wildlife, Forensic anthropologists on site were able to quickly assess the morphology, the shape and structure of the recovered fragments. It was determined that these remains were non-human. While this was a disappointment to those hoping for a swift resolution, it demonstrated the rigorous filtering process of the investigation. Every item, no matter how small, was treated as significant until proven otherwise. However, the search did yield material that was secured for analysis. Police were photographed removing several bags of evidence. While the specific contents remain classified, investigative sources suggest that the teams were looking for non-biological items that could link the suspect to the crime. This includes synthetic fibers from clothing, fragments of plastic from the interior of the suspect's camper van, or digital storage devices. The principle at play here is Locard's exchange principle, which states that every contact leaves a trace. If the suspect and the victim were in the same location, there should be a cross-transfer of fibers or hair. The real search, however, began after the excavators left. The bags of soil and debris were transported to high-tech laboratories in Germany, specifically the institutes affiliated with the BK. Here, the investigation moved to the molecular level. Scientists are currently utilizing advanced DNA profiling techniques that can extract genetic profiles from touch DNA minute traces left by skin cells even after years of environmental exposure. They are also conducting soil analysis to compare the pollen and mineral composition found on the suspect's belongings with the soil from the search site. There are differing schools of thought regarding the value of this high-tech approach. Supporters argue that science is the only way to bypass the suspect's silence. If a single fiber from the missing daughter's nightwear is found in the soil of the rat path, it would be irrefutable proof of his involvement. On the other hand, skeptics argue that the passage of time is a formidable enemy. Nearly 2 decades of rain, wind, and animal activity have likely degraded much of the biological evidence. They question whether this expensive display of technology is a genuine attempt to find the truth, or a strategic move by the prosecution to show the public and the courts that they are doing everything possible before the suspect's potential release. Regardless of the motive, the technology of the search represents the final frontier of the case. The investigators have moved beyond the who and the why, and are now entirely focused on the where. The radar maps, the chemical swabs, and the DNA sequencers are the new witnesses. They do not forget, they do not lie, and they do not change their stories. As the world waits for the results of the laboratory tests, the silence of the Algarve is now being interpreted by machines, in the hope that data can finally provide the closure that human testimony has failed to deliver. While the excavators were digging up the soil in the Algarve, a different kind of battle was being fought in the sterile, fluorescent-lit courtrooms of Germany. It is a story of technicalities, missed opportunities, and a judicial decision in late 2024 that sent shockwaves through the international prosecution team. We call this phase the legal deadlock. To understand the stakes, we must first clarify the suspect's current status. Christian B. is currently serving a prison sentence for a crime committed against a 72-year-old American woman in Praia da Luz. However, this sentence is finite. According to prison records, his term is set to conclude in September of the year 2025. The strategy of the German prosecution was clear: to secure additional convictions for other acts committed in Portugal, thereby extending his imprisonment. This would buy them the necessary time to finalize the complex case regarding the missing British daughter. The centerpiece of this strategy was a case involving a woman known to the public as Hazel. This incident occurred in the year 2004, 3 years prior to the disappearance of the British girl. Hazel was attacked in her apartment in the Algarve by an intruder wielding a weapon and recording the event with a camera. In court, Hazel provided a harrowing testimony. She described the attacker in detail, noting his chilling demeanor and physical attributes. However, in October of the year 2024, the regional court in Braunschweig delivered a verdict that dismantled the prosecution's plan. The court acquitted Christian B. of all 5 additional charges related to severe incidents in Portugal, including the attack on Hazel. The reasoning behind this acquittal was not a declaration of innocence in the moral sense, but a lack of definitive identification in the legal sense. The defense team for Christian B. launched a surgically precise attack on the reliability of eyewitness memory. The pivotal moment of the trial revolved around the description of the attacker's eyes. Hazel had testified that her attacker had piercing blue eyes. The defense argued that this description was too generic to support a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. They contended that thousands of men in the region could fit that description. Without DNA evidence linking Christian B. to Hazel's apartment, the court ruled that the visual identification alone was insufficient. This ruling sparked immediate controversy due to a piece of evidence that surfaced outside the courtroom. Investigative journalists from The Sun uncovered a police report from the year 2018 that seemed to corroborate a key detail of Hazel's testimony. Hazel had stated that her attacker had a distinct, deformed scar on his thigh. The police report confirmed that Christian B. indeed possesses a scar matching that description. Legal analysts have expressed confusion and frustration over why this specific correlation, the scar combined with the blue eyes, was not enough to sway the judges. The acquittal was seen by many as a triumph of legal technicality over circumstantial probability. The implications of this acquittal are catastrophic for the timeline of the investigation into the missing British daughter. With these additional charges cleared, the safety net is gone. The deadline of September 2025 is now a hard precipice. This creates a terrifying scenario for the investigators. If the German prosecutors cannot charge Christian B. with the taking of the British girl before his release date, he will be a free man. We must analyze the risk this poses. Christian B. is a man with a history of fleeing across borders. He has lived under false identities. He has access to a network of associates in the transient communities of Europe. If he is released, there is a high probability that he will disappear again, perhaps to a country without an extradition treaty with Germany. In a series of letters sent from his prison cell, Christian B. has already signaled his intent. He has mocked the investigation, writing that the police have nothing on him. He predicts that the case will collapse and that he will be vindicated. His confidence stems from the fact that the legal system operates on proof, not suspicion. The prosecutors have publicly stated they have concrete evidence that the British daughter is no longer alive, yet they have admitted they lack the forensic chain to prove Christian B. was the one responsible. This is the definition of a legal deadlock. The authorities are convinced they have the right man. They have his phone at the scene. They have his confession to a friend. They have his vehicle transfer records. But without a body, and without DNA placing him in the room, they cannot cross the threshold required for a murder indictment. The acquittal in the Hazel case has forced the prosecution into a corner. They are now racing against the clock. This explains the desperate urgency of the search operations in 2025. They are no longer just looking for answers. They are looking for the one piece of physical debris that can serve as an arrest warrant before the prison gates open. It protects the rights of the accused to a fair trial, demanding absolute certainty before depriving a man of his liberty. But for the families of the victims, this protection feels like a cruelty. It allows a man with a documented history of severe offenses to potentially walk away because a witness described the shade of his eyes, but could not produce a fingerprint. The German legal system is meticulous and slow, but the calendar is relentless. The fall of 2025 will be the deciding moment. Will the prosecutors play their final card, the indictment for the Madeleine case, or will the evidence remain just out of reach, allowing the suspect to vanish into the fog once again? While the excavators fell silent in the Algarve, a new voice emerged from the confines of a high-security prison in Germany. This voice did not come from a police interview or a courtroom testimony, but from the written hand of the suspect himself, Christian B. In the summer of the year 2025, following the conclusion of the search operations in Portugal, a series of letters penned by the suspect was released to the media. These documents provide a rare and chilling insight into the mindset of the man at the center of this global mystery. They reveal a personality defined by defiance, narcissism, and a calculated understanding of the forensic gaps in the case against him. To analyze these letters effectively, we must first consider the context. Christian B. wrote these missives while serving a sentence for a severe offense against an elderly individual. Despite being isolated from the outside world, he was acutely aware of the media storm surrounding the renewed searches at the Arade Dam and the Rat Path. His reaction to these operations was not one of fear, but of mockery. In one of the most significant passages, Christian B. directly addresses the lack of physical evidence linking him to the disappearance of the British daughter. He writes with a sense of triumph, "The truly important, decisive questions will never be answered. Was I or my vehicle seen near the scene of the crime on that night? Is there any of my DNA at the scene? Are there traces of the victim's DNA in my vehicle? No, no, no." This repetition of the word "no" is psychologically revealing. It suggests that Christian B. is banking entirely on the absence of forensic proof. He is not arguing that he is a good man. He is arguing that the police cannot prove he was there. He is challenging the burden of proof. Legal analysts suggest this indicates a high level of criminal sophistication. He understands that in the German legal system, suspicion, no matter how strong, is not enough for a murder conviction. There must be a biological link, and he is confident that after nearly 2 decades, that link does not exist. Furthermore, the letters contain a direct attack on the integrity of the investigation. He accuses the German authorities of fabricating a case against him to cover up their own lack of progress. He writes, "From the very beginning, they were preparing a miscarriage of justice to make me disappear without a trace." He claims that 80% of the things reported about him in the media are false, and that these falsehoods are being spread by the investigators themselves. This is a classic defense tactic known as Darvo deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. By positioning himself as the victim of a corrupt judicial system, he attempts to garner sympathy or at least sow doubt in the public mind. He portrays himself not as an offender, but as a scapegoat chosen by the state because of his past record. Perhaps the most disturbing element of the correspondence is his prediction regarding the outcome of the investigation. He states, with absolute certainty, that the charges will be dropped. He writes, "One does not have to be a realist like me to predict that the accusation against me will not happen, and the investigation will be stopped." He goes further, issuing a metaphorical threat about the moment he is vindicated. When the investigation is stopped, it will hit the world like a bomb. We must evaluate these words carefully. Is this the confidence of an innocent man, or the arrogance of a sociopath who believes he has outsmarted the system? The tone is not desperate. It is superior. He mocks the witnesses, referring to them as bought, and dismisses the prosecutors as incompetent. However, there is a contradiction in his narrative. While he claims the police have nothing, the very fact that he feels compelled to write these letters suggests a level of anxiety. Psychologists argue that if he were truly secure in his safety, he would remain silent. The need to control the narrative, to reach out to the press, and to belittle the police efforts suggests that the pressure is affecting him. He is not a silent, trembling figure in the dock. He is a vocal, articulate, and combative individual who is fighting a psychological war with the detectives. He is taunting them, essentially saying, "I know what you are looking for, and I know you will not find it." As the clock ticks down to his potential release, these letters stand as a testament to his belief that he has committed the perfect crime, one that has left no trace, no witness, and, in his mind, no possibility of justice. The investigation into the disappearance of the British daughter has always been a marathon, but as we enter the latter half of the year 2025, it has turned into a sprint. The driving force behind this urgency is a single date on the calendar, September 2025. This is the scheduled release date for Christian B. from the German prison system. The race against time is not a dramatic cliché. It is a literal legal deadline that keeps the prosecutors in Braunschweig awake at night. The situation is stark. If the German authorities cannot secure an indictment for the murder or taking of the British girl before this date, Christian B. will be a free man. We must analyze the implications of this release. Christian B. is a man of many faces. He has a history of transience, moving effortlessly between countries. He has lived in vehicles, squatted in abandoned buildings, and utilized false documents. Intelligence reports suggest that if he is released, he has no intention of remaining in Germany. He has allegedly stated that he will disappear immediately. This potential disappearance poses a catastrophic risk to the case. If he crosses into a jurisdiction with weak extradition treaties, or if he simply vanishes into the criminal underworld as he has done before, the chance of ever bringing him to trial drops to near zero. Furthermore, a free suspect has the ability to destroy evidence. While the police have searched his known properties, there is always the possibility of hidden caches that only he knows about, locations that he could sanitize once he is at liberty. The prosecution's dilemma is fueled by the evidence gap. Investigators have publicly stated that they have concrete evidence that the victim is deceased. This belief is based, in part, on the massive volume of digital data recovered from the suspect. Reports indicate that police possess 80 gigabytes of data, including journals, videos, and images found on the hard drives in the factory. This is a colossal amount of information. However, having information and having admissible evidence are two different things. The challenge lies in the smoking gun. The 80 gigabytes contain proof of his depravity and his fantasies, as seen in the manuscripts where he describes abductions. They contain proof of his presence in Portugal. But do they contain a direct image or a specific file that undeniably links him to the specific individual from Praia da Luz? The prosecutors admit they are still missing that final piece of the puzzle. They have a mountain of circumstantial blocks, but they lack the keystone. The frantic search operations in the summer of 2025, the digging at the Arade Dam, and the clearing of the rat path were a direct response to this pressure. The authorities were hoping that the soil would yield what the hard drives could not: a physical trace, a fiber, a bone fragment, or a piece of jewelry. The fact that they were digging so close to the deadline indicates a level of desperation. They are trying to build a forensic wall to keep him in prison. There is also a strategic legal battle occurring. The prosecutors are attempting to find other ways to keep him detained. They have looked into preventive detention laws, which allow the state to hold individuals deemed a danger to the public even after their sentence is served. However, the threshold for this is incredibly high in the German legal system, which prioritizes civil liberties. Without a new conviction, like the one they failed to secure in the Hazel case, preventive detention is difficult to justify legally. The detectives are morally certain that Christian B. is the offender. His profile, his location, his confession to Helge B., and his vehicle transfer all point to him. But the law requires legal certainty. It requires a chain of evidence that cannot be broken by a defense lawyer. As the days count down to September, the atmosphere in the prosecutor's office is one of intense strain. They are reviewing every file, re-interviewing every witness, and retesting every sample. They are looking for a mistake he made 18 years ago that they missed. They are racing against a man who believes he has already won. If the clock runs out, the suspect walks out, and the most famous missing person case in modern history may remain unsolved forever. We have now traveled through 18 years of investigations, from the chaotic golden hour in Praia da Luz to the silent, high-tech laboratories of Germany in the year 2025. We have examined the open window, the drifter in the camper van, the secret stash in the factory, and the digging in the reservoirs. Yet, as we reach the conclusion of this series, we are left not with a verdict, but with a question mark. The story of the missing British subject remains, tragically, an unfinished story. The current status of the case is a complex shade of gray. We have a prime suspect, Christian B., who fits the profile of the offender perfectly. We have a timeline that places him at the scene. We have a confession she did not scream that chills the soul. And yet, we do not have a body, and we do not have a trial. For the guardians, Kate and Jerry, this lack of resolution is a continuing trauma. They have lived for nearly 2 decades in a state of limbo. They have faced the judgment of the media, the failure of the initial investigation, and the false dawns of various leads. Despite this, their stance has remained consistent. They have never given up hope. Even as police theories shifted from a disappearance to a fatal event, the family has maintained that until there is physical proof of a loss of life, they will continue to look for their daughter. Their resilience is the emotional core of this story. They are not just victims, they are the keepers of her memory. The case has also become a mirror for society. It has changed how we view safety, how we view parenting, and how we view the media. It taught the world that danger can exist in the most beautiful of places, a paradise like the Algarve, and that a criminal can hide in plain sight, living in a camper van next to the tourists he watches. From a forensic perspective, the ending of this story has likely already been written. It just hasn't been read yet. The answer is almost certainly contained within the evidence we have discussed. It might be locked in an encrypted file on the hard drives from the factory that supercomputers have yet to crack. It might be in a microscopic soil sample from the Arade Dam that is currently sitting in a petri dish in a German lab. Or it might be in the memory of the suspect himself. The screaming silence that Helge B. described at the festival remains the most haunting image. It implies a secret that has been kept for too long. But secrets in the digital age are hard to keep forever. Technology is advancing. DNA testing is becoming more sensitive. Witness alliances fracture over time. As of late 2025, the gate of the prison is opening for Christian B., but the eyes of the world are watching him. The bomb he predicted in his letters may not be his vindication, but his undoing. The global interest in this case ensures that he will never truly be invisible again. We close this file knowing that while the legal case is deadlocked, the search for the truth is alive. The window that was opened in 2007 let in a darkness that has not yet lifted, but as long as there are investigators willing to dig and a public willing to remember, the story of the young one from Praia da Luz is not over.